Welcome to another episode of the Finding Serenity in the Midst of Chaos podcast. Today, we are talking about how to transform your life by turning your inner critic into an empowering self-talk with Ben Milston. This episode especially relates to you if you are the kind of person who are constantly feeling like you're your biggest inner critic and often find yourself judging your thoughts and your actions. If you're lost, confused, and frustrated on your journey of self-discovery and unsure of how to progress forward, and if you're tired of feeling overwhelmed by life and everyday situations, this is for you. I would like you to stay till the end because by the end, you will have a clear understanding of what the voice inside of your head and how to relate to it with compassion and patience. Learn how to take back control of your life, both internally and externally, all through the power of your self-talk, and understand how to shift your perception of life, allowing you to feel empowered, confident, and in control. So stay tuned. Hello, welcome to today's episode, Ben Milston, our guest today. Hello, Ben.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for coming. This is one of my favorite subjects because I do lots of lives on this topics. Power, whatever we say to ourselves, it becomes our reality, doesn't it? And you're gonna, I'm sure, to delve into that. But before we do all of that, please tell our listeners who you are, what you do, and who you help.
Right, so my name is Ben Milston. As you said, I'm a mindset and transformational coach, and I help people who are new to the self-development, self-discovery space, who are struggling with depression, overwhelm, anxiety, to take back control of their life, to find hope again, to find happiness and inner peace that I think, in all fairness, that we're all looking for, but often when we reach some certain depths of despair, do we really realize how badly we need that in our life?
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it sometimes has to come to that place of despair, unfortunately, for us to do something because our brain is protecting us to sit there, and this is comfortable, even though I hate it, this is comfortable, isn't it? And it's just, yes, sometimes has to come to that place of despair. So who do you help, Ben? I know we said about this is for you if you are, but typically who do you work with?
Yeah, so I really specialize with working with middle-class women aged 30 to 55. I
Okay.
tend to bring in a type of energy that for a lot of women, they might not have that kind of relationship with a man. And that's something that I find really empowering for myself to be able to bring that kind of masculine, feminine energy
Balance.
into the sessions that I think that is lacking a lot within our society. And so I love being able to find, like you said, exactly that balance with people to really get into a lot of like what we may be missing in our day-to-day life.
Yes. And I'm so glad that we're gonna delve into that inner critic element today and the self-talk because our words are so powerful and we don't sometimes even realize how powerful they are. And before I ask you what the inner critic is all about, I used to say to my clients and the people in my webinars, if you speak to to your best friend like you speak to yourself, see how long you stay friends with them because it's just sometimes we can say horrible things to ourselves. So, but what are the mistakes and misconceptions that often happen when we're trying to silence our inner critic? And in fact, what is that inner critic in the first place? Just tell us.
Yeah, so it's interesting because this inner critic, this inner voice that we have going on is really just an incredible defense mechanism that our subconscious mind has created for us to essentially keep us safe.
Yes.
It's the subconscious mind, which is responsible for 90 to 95% of everything that we do, we say, we think, our behaviors internally. And its role is essentially to make sure that we stay alive. And it does that in any way possible. And so our inner critic is this kind of voice that it's created inside of us to tell us, don't go out there. It's unknown. You don't know what's going to happen. Stay in this safe bubble. Stay in your comfort zone. And unfortunately, in the way that it often does that is through the behaviors that we've learned, the conditioning that we've learned from growing up, from society. And this often reflects in negative ways because it's the negative things that we connect to that essentially keeps us, too scared to express ourselves for fear of being rejected or fear of not belonging, fear of being laughed at or being judged. Maybe we have a fear of being, of failing. And so we don't put ourselves out there, or we don't try our best, or we procrastinate or self-sabotage because of this fear of failure, because that voice is trying to keep us safe in this, in this bubble of just familiarity. And often what that familiarity, that comfort zone, isn't where we want to be. And that's this stagnant kind of depressive zone or overwhelming kind of zone, but it's just something that's familiar. So that's where our mind keeps us to. It's saying, we're safe here. We haven't died. Let's stay here.
Yeah, and it's exactly that. It's this main function of that part of our brain is to survive, isn't it? And it's learned to survive in the old ages where a lion was running towards you and then you really had to survive. But now it cannot tell the difference between whether it's a lion coming towards you or whether you have to do a presentation in front of 100 people. It's just no difference to it at all because you need to survive no matter what. But why is it that we constantly then how I know we understand that how it's our detriment, but how do I silence that inner voice that constantly criticizes me?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest misconceptions is this idea of silencing our inner critic, because this inner critic, like we said, it's a natural and beautiful part of the makeup that we are as human beings. And so we have this inner critic. It's just what happens is we were never told to, I wouldn't say ignore, but disassociate ourselves, our true selves, from this voice. And so it's as though we're just taking on and hearing this voice and listening to this voice as though it's fact, as though it's, who we really are, as though, this voice knows better than any other voice that we may hear in our head. Because there's, we can have like these battles of, yes, do this, no, don't do that. Yes, do this, no, do that. And so we think that it's a part of us, but it's more of a manifestation of the subconscious trying to keep us safe. And so rather than trying to silence it, we want to understand, one, that it only has as much power as we give it, or we allow it to have, as we allow it to, take power. But also the idea that we can talk back to this inner critic. It doesn't need to be a monologue. There can be internal dialogue of just kind of, and befriending this voice, recognizing that it's going to be saying, stuff all the time about everything, and just recognizing that it's just trying to keep you safe. It doesn't know the whole story, the whole picture. It doesn't see the whole picture. And a lot of the times, if we take a step back, it's actually can be quite humorous what this voice is saying, because when we actually analyze the truth to the situation, this voice is very far off from what's actually happening. So it's that kind of bringing a bit of space and disassociating from who we are as, people inside, how we actually feel, what feels true and aligned for us, and this kind of nagging voice that I read somewhere, the idea that it's kind of like a roommate. And it's just this roommate that's just talking nonstop. And at some point, we just need to kind of recognize that it's there and that roommate's just talking, but we don't need to just pay attention to everything that it says or feel like we have to revolve our world around everything that it says.
And there's a couple of things that came to me when you were saying, dissociate yourself from that inner voice. Well, the fact that you're actually starting to hear and recognize and be aware of it means that you are already starting to dissociate. So that's a good thing. And also, we always think that this is our voice, but actually isn't. It's probably some of the beliefs that we've adopted and we've taken taken it as read and never even questioned. And then now we are
Yeah.
starting to question, it's starting to bug you a little bit. So, so you're already starting to dissociate. So instead of being critical of the inner critic, maybe we could be curious about what is it saying. And then when you, like you said, when you really pay attention, is this really true? No, it's not. Just, you know, go away, buzz off, whatever, or just listen and just smile at it and keep it kind of under tap, if you like, because it's like you say, we don't have to give all our power to it, which we often do. So what is the biggest thing you learned from the decade of depression you struggled with? And you know, you mentioned it, and if you wouldn't mind to share that.
Yes. So my kind of background is I struggled heavily with depression and anxiety, low self-worth, no confidence for about 10 years, 10 plus years growing up into my young adulthood. And this led me to really destructive self-talk. It led me to substance abuse, attempted suicide. And
Wow.
it was really from that kind of my low point, recognizing either I end it here or I end it in a different way because I need to find a way out. And
Yes.
so I'm very grateful for that push to actually find a way out and go on my self-discovery journey. But one of the biggest realizations that I had was that if my self-talk was powerful enough to lead me to the brink of suicide, then it could be powerful enough to do anything else. Like if I
Wow.
was actually going to and considering taking my life, you know, even knowing like I was brought up in a fairly good family and good schooling and, you know, from Sydney, Australia. So on the outside, you know, things were going well, as you could say, but it was what was happening inside
Yeah.
that was creating my perspective, my, you know, perception of all this trauma and depression and
Yeah.
whatnot. And so that kind of realization of, wow, my inside, my self-talk, my perception can ultimately create this massive depression and wanting to take my life. Well, I wonder if it could do the exact opposite. I wonder if it could give me life. I wonder if it could empower me. I wonder, you know, how powerful it could take. So one of the biggest things that I would say is the understanding and recognition of what perception is for how we experience the world. It's like the idea that, you know, someone could say something and to one person they get offended and the other person they don't.
Doesn't,
You
yeah.
know, and it's not that what they said was offensive, it's how we perceived it.
Perceived
It's
it.
how we internalized it. And so if we're internalizing depression or anxiety or overwhelm, well, then we can also shift that and internalize it and perceive it in a different way
Different way.
that brings out, you know, more humor, more, like you said before, I loved the curiosity to, you know, well, how else can I see this?
Yes.
What else could, you know, how else could I look at this situation?
That's fascinating. And I mean, I want to come back to that point. If my mind can do this, what else can it do? What other powers it has? And you recognize that depression or whatever, it was all coming from inside of you, not to blame that it was your fault, but it is created by your mind, which is so powerful to create such an extreme, but also is as powerful to create the opposite. And it's such a great realization for you and for those who you are helping right now. I want to really reiterate that to our listeners. Our minds are so powerful. It is what we tell it to and what our perceptions are. And just because you had one perception so far doesn't mean you can't change it. You can change it. You can choose a different one and you can change your life. That's amazing, Ben. That's really great story. Thank you for sharing. So what are the three biggest thought patterns that stop people from this true transformation?
Yeah. So what I've seen from people that I've worked with is really, you know, we want to tackle some core beliefs that people often have when thinking about their change.
Yeah.
And so this, you know, comes down to the uncertainty or the beliefs that they're not capable or they're not able to change, the uncertainty or the beliefs surrounding if it's possible to change, if it's possible for them to change, or if change itself is possible. And then the uncertainty and the beliefs surrounding, well, will change actually help me? because
Yeah.
when we have these blocks surrounding change itself, then there's not going to be the determination and the motivation to want to change. There's not going to be the push to want to change.
Yeah.
The first time that there's any kind of hindrance or obstacle, the first time that there's any kind of withdrawal or mistake or whatever, it's
Mm.
going to come back to, well, I can't do it. I'm not good enough. This was never meant for me.
Yeah.
What's the point? All of these kinds of thoughts. So if we
Mm.
can get past how we perceive or how we believe about change, we're able and capable of change, if it's possible, and if change would actually help us, well, then
Mm.
it breeds the mindset that we just keep going and keep finding a way until we break out of the stuckness or the situation or the depression, the feelings that we're
Mm.
currently feeling.
Yeah. And also it stems from the two deepest fears as you alluded to earlier in the talk, is that, the fear of rejection and fear of not belonging, isn't it? And
Yeah.
if you're not part of the tribe, you're nothing. That's how your really deepest fears, and that's going to keep driving those thought patterns. What if I fail? What if they don't like me anymore? What if I don't belong? And if I'm not good enough? It all comes back to those deepest things. And if we keep digging and digging and digging, it's like, you know what? It's not true, because you're still good enough anyway. You're good enough already. You don't have to do anything. So that's a great way to just keep digging and helping us. So how do you help people do this? Is there,
So
yeah.
So what I like to understand, and like I was saying, the way that we perceive things is so important. So it starts out with, we want to understand what our thoughts are and what our beliefs are.
Yeah.
What our current thoughts are, what our current beliefs are, because it's essentially the thoughts that we have and the beliefs that we have that create the perception that we have, that create the way that we experience the world. And so we start out understanding, well, what is the thoughts and the beliefs that we currently have? Then we understand, well, what are the how did the thoughts come to being? How did these beliefs come to be? So we look back into, why is it that you think this way and not a different way? Now, where did these certain beliefs come from? How did you start believing like this? And why did you start taking these beliefs to be truths?
Yeah. Yes.
So then we look back into why you think the way that you think and why you believe the way you believe. And then we look into, well, how would you like to think? What's the type of thought that you would like to have? What's the type of thought of the person you would like to be? What's the type of thought that they have? What are the type of beliefs that they have? And then through working with challenging their old belief systems, through awareness over the way that they speak and their self-talk and the way that their thought patterns, then shifting in new ways of thinking through repetition, through affirmations, through just awareness, through also confirming beliefs by seeing them and by realizing them, by celebrating, ourselves through them, that slowly we shift our thought patterns and we shift our belief systems towards where we want to be.
Yeah, that's great. And, sometimes you can't help the thoughts that keep coming into your head, but you don't need to be dwelling on them, and you don't need to give them as much power as, as you're giving, because, as you said, some of those thoughts actually aren't even your thoughts. They are not even the beliefs. They haven't even come from you. When you're 6, 7, 8 years old, you believed them, and that became your thought pattern, because belief is essentially a thought that you no longer think. You just it just keeps happening, and you don't question. So looking for the truth is the best way. And the inner critic, you deal with the inner critic by just being compassionate, because it has its job. And be curious and be compassionate, as I summarize what I've heard from you. And you can. I love the fact that you said, "Is this possible? Is this possible for me?" And that's a really, is it possible at all? That's a really great example of really digging deeper into the beliefs and not giving into the excuses, as I call them, or the fear really that drives it all, to transform our lives. And there's many examples of transformation. And if we can find one example, and I love that your example about if my mind is powerful enough to do this, what else can it do? It must be
Yeah.
powerful enough to do something else. And you are the master of your own mind, and you can
Yeah.
become it. It's not the other way around. So that's kind of to remind our audience again and again and again, we have the power to be who we want to be, not continue to be who we have learned to be if that no longer fits with who we are, right? So that's
100%.
great. Ben, where can people find you? Tell our audience.
So, or on Facebook or on Instagram, if you just type in Ben Milston, you'll have the links there. Would love to just start a message with you guys. I love speaking to people. I love just conversing and understanding, different realities, different experiences that people have. So even just to send me a message would be super amazing. If you want, I've got a Facebook group that has a lot of great value and a beautiful supportive community. Or my website, you can check out at benmilston.com, send me a message through there or read on my story. Either way, it'd just be really beautiful to connect with any of you.
Excellent. That's fantastic. And I'll put all those links into the show notes so people can find you easily after listening to this and watching this episode. Ben, thank you very much for being our guest today. It was lovely to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem at all. And thank you again for tuning into another episode of the Finding Serenity in the Midst of Chaos podcast. If you love this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share this episode with someone who you think is going to benefit from it, because there will be so many people who is probably going through this exact same thing. And we will see you in another episode next week. Bye-bye.